Okay, welcome back to the Future State Podcast. This is episode 2. We want to talk about, for this episode, the biggest mistakes that you can make as a junior associate. We'll also cover what you can do about them to avoid them, and how you can progress your career, get to the next stage, get to senior associate, experienced associate. Eventually, if you're a senior associate already, you want to get to manager. All of these mistakes are pretty big. And so we want to help you address them and talk about them, right? So, hey everybody, again, I'm John. I was in consulting, digital strategy consulting for about 9 years. Then I joined the startup world for a few years, building AI and Web3. And now I'm in Fortune 500, building AI. Serena, you want to go next?
Thanks, Sean. Hey everyone, Serena here. I spent about 2 years in consulting and then moved into the corporate environment, where I spent about 8 years with a Fortune 100 and then moved into a startup, and then most recently returned back to corporate focused on payments.
I'm John as well, and I've been in consulting since I began my career, from associate until now I'm a managing director. It's been a good 12-year journey. I'm happy to chat about it.
12 years. All right. Okay.
Lifer.
Yeah, a consulting lifer. Partner John. Okay, great. So what we wanted to talk about the biggest mistakes that you might encounter as a junior associate or an early associate, and how to get past those mistakes, right? And so we'll start with a few today. If we run out of time, we'll have a part 2. So let us know if you like this kind of stuff, and we'll do a part 2.
Click like if you like it.
Yeah,
Like
and
subscribe.
Smash the like button and the subscribe button.
Smash it twice.
Smash it twice. No, then it unsubscribes.
Or smash it 3 times.
Smash it an odd number of
numbers.
times. So you can come back. So all right. So look, being a first year associate is hard, especially if you're right out of school, right? You're not necessarily prepared in school for what the real world and professional life is like, right? You encounter, all of a sudden, you have, parents are paying for rent, they're paying for food, you got classes that have schedules. I got great parents. But you have all this structure when you're in school, and then when you leave school, all of a sudden you are on your own, right? And so that's not just on your personal life, but like also professionally. And so being an early associate is hard, and not necessarily people actually tell you how to be a good associate. You kind of just have to figure out your way around or learn by example from other people that are out there, right? And so you'll probably run into these mistakes. So we want to address them, right? Number one, one of the biggest mistakes that you can make as a junior associate is not understanding your role, and especially in relation to your team's role, right? So everyone else on that team. And so what I mean by that is, you're an associate. What is actually an associate's role, and how does that compare to a senior associate's role? What is a senior associate supposed to actually do? What is their manager supposed to do? What is your project director supposed to do? And then how do all these people in this project team work together, and how do you kind of field different roles and responsibilities to create an effective output or team and deliver for your clients? What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I think even when we went in, normally you have like a hiring, start class training. That's actually how we all met. But I think in those sessions, no one really clearly defined what was an associate one.
Right.
Because depending on the team you're on, like it takes like different forms and different shapes.
Yeah.
I think for me, the basic definition at the time for all the projects I was on was like, you do the bitch work. Literally, like you're the one.
Can we say that on YouTube?
Yeah, we can say that.
Sure. Yeah, we'll bleep it.
You can bleep
Awesome.
it, yeah. So you just do the bitch work, and you are the one entering the data. You're the one, I guess when we had printing, oh my gosh, you're old. You would print shit. So it's just like very, very menial work.
Yeah. So John, like to you, what is an associate's role? Like what are you, if you're a new incoming associate, you joined your first team, you joined your first project, how should I think about what my role is and what I need to do? What is my responsibility in a project?
Have you guys seen Jiro Dreams of Sushi?
Yeah.
An associate is the rice maker, right? You're coming in, you are given a very specific task usually. You have to like learn how to do it well, and it's going to be grunt work for a bit. But then doing that grunt work is when you're learning about the rest of the field and what everyone else is doing. And if you can show that you can handle the rice, you move up to fish. Right? I think that's a metaphor I think of anyway when I'm describing the associate role.
Yeah. Totally agree, right? So I actually had I had a partner once, really eclectic, very interesting guy. I had him sit me down one day, and he explained to me the concept of like his ladder for consulting, right? And every step in this ladder is essentially a new role and a set of responsibilities, and how one role leads to the next step on that ladder.
Or each previous step builds you up for the next step.
Exactly. And so what he said to me, and like that structure is generally, as a first year associate, you are responsible for the task within a deliverable,
Yeah,
right?
right.
You are responsible for building one spreadsheet or one slide or a handful of slides or one section of a slide. That is your goal. Is you are responsible for this task, right? Now, a senior associate, you are now mastering the idea of the task, right? And so now you're really good at creating and completing tasks. So whether that's one deliverable, a set of deliverables, a set of actions, a set of sections within that deliverable.
Right.
A manager now is responsible for the success of a package of deliverables, right? And so you want to make sure timelines are on. You want to make sure those deliverables are presented on with the quality that you want. And then you get to senior manager. That's a mastery of that. You get to director. That you are now responsible for the relationship and the success of the things that you're supposed to present. Senior director, mastery of that. Partner, you are now looking at a portfolio of those individual projects and client relationships, and then so on, and hitting the mastery of that, right? And so if you think about that ladder, as an associate, you are responsible for the task, right? And that task is, like you said, it's grunt work, right? But the other way to think about that is that on this ladder, every step, actually what they need from the step below is they need to trust that the step below understands their role and can deliver that role.
Yeah.
Right? So your job as an associate is the task,
Yep.
as well as making sure that the person above you and the rest of your team has the trust in you to complete that responsibility. Right?
Yes. Or if you don't know how to fully complete it, you're able to ask for help quickly.
Yeah.
And like become good at that skill.
Right.
If you're new to the job.
Right. It's the kind of thing where you say, well, early on, you either have to be able to do the work or be coachable to learn how to do the work, right? You can't have neither.
Yeah.
You need at least one of those things to be able to make it to like the next stage or at least stay where you are. Serena, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are fair points. You know, you mentioned coachability. Let's dive into that a little bit more. Coachability on one end is like being malleable and taking on feedback and applying that feedback quite effectively on your next deliverable if you've made a mistake. But then the other extreme is when you have too much hand holding and that becomes a burden, and that could also be a mistake that people run into. I don't know, have you guys had that type of experience of coachability?
To me, coachability was mostly like two things. One is like, thank you for the feedback. And two is, I want to make sure I understand it. And so maybe there's some follow-up questions or a little bit of a discussion. And then like mutual agreement on what the next step is.
Yeah.
And I think even if I didn't fully agree with or sometimes understand the feedback the first time, if I kind of followed those steps, generally you move in the right direction. And you or like maybe they'll rephrase themselves or whatever, and then both be on happier terms. Right.
I mean, so coachability is interesting, right? Is because I think there's a fine line between taking direction well versus needing the direction to do well, right? Like there's a balance in between, and I think that probably brings us to the second biggest mistake that you can make as a early associate, which is like needing too much hand-holding, right? Like you said. When I look at a junior associate, what I think of as coachable is that I can impart to an associate the premise of what I want to accomplish. I don't want to tell you how you have to do it. I don't want to like micromanage you. I want you to figure out how to accomplish that premise in the quality that I expect, right? I don't really want to tell you like exactly what I want, or I need you to figure that out, right? So I don't, but that's my personal style. Do you feel differently about that?
No, I agree with you conceptually. Come back to me. We'll cut that out.
I think, one example I can think of as it relates to coachability is, at least for myself, feedback that I've gotten is in the past around, executive presence.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggled with that concept of executive presence because none of my leaders could accurately describe what that meant. And that was, for me, a blocker oftentimes getting promoted. It's like, oh, you don't have enough executive presence. Like, all right, give me examples. And they're like, it just means like the way you talk.
Yeah.
Like, or the way you present. I'm like, that's
Right.
so like intangible. But, I didn't let that faze me. And I think a lot of, I heard the feedback, had a hard time reconciling with it, but over time, probably just talked with my leaders to say like, who of the people in the team or in the room demonstrates the best executive presence, and I started kind of seeing those nuances, seeing that behavior, and then try to apply it to myself. So again, like in the beginning was hard to like comprehend because you're going to get a lot of feedback like that that's like intangible, qualitative, and then you just try to ask for more information and go from there.
So using that example, right? So and very close to what I was saying is, I don't want to handhold you. I want to give you the premise of, I need you to have more executive presence. I need you to be more confident. I need you to impart executive presence, right? What I need from you as an associate is to figure out, well, what is executive presence? Who has executive presence? What about them has executive presence, and what parts of that should I emulate?
Yeah.
I don't need to handhold you, or I don't want to handhold you to say, well, you should speak louder, and then you should end your sentences on a downward inflection. You should sound more. I don't want to give you that kind of level of stuff.
Why not?
Because
there's no time.
There's no time, right?
Yeah.
There's no time,
Yeah.
and also like I can't. So I think that everyone is on their personal professional journey. You have to define who you want to be and how you want to get there. And so I think you have to do some of the work. You know what I mean? To figure out what it is, and this is what we talk about like on the product side of things a lot, right? Which is like, I'm going to give you the business requirement.
Yeah.
I don't want to tell you exactly how it should be designed. I don't want to tell you what technical requirements need to be met. I need you to hit my business requirement. I need you to accomplish the goal. Right? You could figure this stuff out in the middle. As long as it accomplishes the goal, you win.
Yeah, and I think when someone is not coachable, where they hear that feedback and they can't figure it out, I think that's what makes like a bad associate.
That's not coachable, right? Is I told you to do executive presence, and you sat there and you're like, okay, I guess, and then you didn't do the rest of the work.
You were like, I could have been stubborn. I could have just like twirled my hands and kind of just let it be. So
I mean, I think there's two different things. One is like, you do nothing, and clearly that's bad. And the other one is, you sort of need 100 instructions. You need them in like 5-minute increments. And I think this gets to like a more micro fundamental thing of like, when you're given a problem, do you spend 5-10 minutes thinking about yourself, maybe Googling, like kind of trying to come up with an answer before you ask a question? Right. I think some people are very much like, I'm just going to ask my team, how do you solve this, without putting any thought into it. I'm going to rely on everyone else to do the thinking, and I'm just going to execute. Yeah. Right? And I hate that behavior.
You hate that.
Hate that behavior.
Yeah. Because because we've always been taught, it's interesting because we've always been taught that like, there are no bad questions. And they're like, you should ask questions and you should learn quickly.
You're allowed to ask questions once you've done a little bit of your own homework.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're not allowed to ask questions with like immediately in reaction. Right.
So I have an example of this, right? And it's a very, very simple example. My very first project in consulting, um, my very first project, my job in talking about grunt work was to listen to 35 interviews with senior stakeholders and take notes. That was my job, right? I had to take notes, I had to put those notes, I had to consolidate the notes into summary action points and whatever.
On a typewriter?
Yeah, no, it was a typewriter. I had to push the thing on the side to do new lines. We're the same age.
This is before ChatGPT.
No, before Copilot.
Before Copilot. So my first role in my very first project, my very first job of consulting was taking notes on these interviews. At the end of the 35 interviews, after the interviews phase of the project had completed, the partner on the project at that time said, "Hey, John, I need you to send me the notes, right?
Yeah.
Because these are I need the client wants the notes. I need you to send me the notes." And so at that time, fresh out of college, I said, "Oh, okay. Well, I have these 35 pages of notes or 35 documents of notes.
Sure.
I packaged them up and sent them to my partner."
Okay.
Right? The partner, and this was like 11:30 at night when he had asked for it an hour before. 11:30 at night, he responds back to me, and he just said one thing. He just said three words. Sorry. He said, "These are terrible." That was his response to me sending it, and that lit a fire under my ass that you wouldn't believe, which is immediately is like I think coachability and adaptability is, oh shit, why are these terrible? What does he need it to be?
Yeah.
Like, why does he, oh, wait a minute. Why does he want these? Who's
Yeah.
reading them?
Yeah.
What do they want to read?
Yeah.
And so I spent the next 4 hours until 4 a.m. in the morning cleaning up notes, putting everything into complete sentences,
Yeah.
making sure every bullet was formatted right, put the period on the ends of the sentences, make sure all the typos were there, make sure all the notes were categorized, and I sent them over at 4 a.m. and I said, "Sorry, this won't happen again." Right? Like that.
Was he happy?
And so he didn't respond. I also don't even know if he sent it to the client immediately. But the point there is, that is so for me personally, if I had an associate, okay, I would give a little more direction than these are terrible, but I think a stellar associate shouldn't need more than that. You know what I mean? Or shouldn't need much more than that. You gotta figure out why.
Yeah. There's this old story about an executive, and he would turn work in, and the CEO would just turn back and say, "Is this the best you can do?" And then guy goes off, does a bunch of work, comes back, same thing again. "This is the best you can do." After 4 times of it, the executive's like, "Yes, this is the best I can do." And the CEO's like, "All right, now I'll read it."
Yeah.
Right. And I think you have to ask yourself that question at least once.
Yeah.
Before you turn something in.
Yeah.
Right? It's just a fair self moment of reflection. Could something be more clear?
Yeah.
Is this the best I can do? And maybe the answer is yes, or maybe, hey, no, I can tweak a couple things and then make it better.
Yeah. No, absolutely, right? And I think that to me is I mean, obviously my example was on the very one extreme of not needing handholding.
Yeah.
Right. But that kind of thing, it shocks you into, oh, what am I doing here? Right. Why did he ask?
Yeah.
What am I trying to accomplish here? And I think that's the kind of coachability, right? That to me is coachability, where you are ready to learn internally, and you're not just waiting for advice. You're open and absorbent to learning, right?
Yeah, I think on that point, it also segues into the attitude, right? Another mistake that associates could have is just their attitude towards work and towards projects. I remember a time when there was a really, really smart senior associate, but they had terrible attitude. They just literally were this project, I'm better than this project. And then I saw a different senior associate who was like, you know what, probably a little less smart, but great attitude. They had associate ones trying to work on their projects because they were just easy to work with, and B, like they were giving really nice like feedback and coaching to people below them that help improve their day to day and their deliverables. So I think when it comes to attitude, like the way you show up for yourself and for the team is really important. And again, like people in consulting are all really smart, and so what really differentiates is how you present yourself and to other teams and clients at the end of the day.
Yeah. That's a really good point. I mean, there's a reason that consulting interviews go through like the airport test, right? Is like yes. So the work that you do as a consultant is a given, right? Like we assume that you can do the work. We assume you can research. We assume you can put together insights. We assume you have good grammar and you can stay up late making
the
slides.
baseline is there.
We assume it.
Yeah.
It's table stakes. Now the next layer is like, can you communicate? If I drop you in front of a C-suite person, can you communicate? Will people like you? Can you be insightful? Can you hold the conversation? Like that's a thing that isn't taught.
Likability.
Likability, yeah, yeah. Have you had because I've worked with like really just not amenable people in consulting. Have you had any experiences with that?
I think at the junior levels, the skills that are required are elevated, but not rare, right? And so, while it's a small amount of the population that can do a certain skill, it's also there's still like hundreds or thousands of candidates who can do those things, proficiently, right? And I go back to my sushi making example of the associate making the rice, and like you can make good rice, and it's hard, but like I'd rather work with someone that makes pretty good rice, but is fun to work with, and deal with someone that makes great rice, but like it's a pain in the ass, right? Because I'm like, is the customer really going to notice the difference in the quality of like the rice? Are they really going to notice the difference in that appendix slide in the back, or like whatever supporting analysis? Probably not. And I'd rather just enjoy my teammates more.
Yeah, but also on top of that, like you have the rest of your team to make sure that that level of whatever insights gets upskilled to where you want it to be, right?
Yeah, right.
At a base level, everyone has to be likable, but you can kind of pull it together to make sure quality is where you want it to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. The fourth biggest mistake that we want to cover for junior associates is actually not finding a good role model for what you're supposed to do, right? Because it's like we said before, no one really teaches you this stuff, and so you're gonna have to teach yourself, and a huge part of teaching yourself is emulating someone that is already good at it, that is good, and that is well respected in the firm and in the role, right? So my first year of my second project at the firm, I had a fantastic senior associate, right? She told me exactly what needs to be done, and importantly is that she framed it as what we're trying to accomplish, and then this is what you should do to accomplish that, right? That is a fundamental shift in thinking from a college student that is just saying like, oh, I got to regurgitate this stuff back to the lecturer that taught it to me, right?
Yeah.
And so she created fantastic quality deliverables. She explained everything in terms of a business side premise.
Yeah.
She also phrased things in a way that that started a way of thinking, right? Which is like, for example, she would say things like, hey, I need you to join this call and take notes. And so a normal person might be like, oh, I got to take notes, right? But she said, the way she would phrase it is, I need you to take notes, and that's great because then this is going to help you recap. It's going to help you come back to the things and help us track this stuff moving forward.
Yeah.
And so she would frame things in terms of what am I gaining by doing these tasks from a business perspective, right?
Yeah.
She was also the one that taught me how to think, how to dissect ambiguous topics, how to think outside the box of not just what are we trying to accomplish with this specific task, but what is the person receiving it? What do they actually need from us? And how can we go above and beyond to solve that need rather than just do a task, right? And so I learned a tremendous amount from her, and she was a great role model, and it was just so much easier to watch someone with a mastery of that, and learn from that rather than just try and figure it out myself, or just keep bumping into the walls and have people yell at me, right?
So you really switched from task orientation to actual problem solving because you had a greater context of what you were solving for, and that's really what she opened for you.
Yeah, and that's not to say you shouldn't do the you have to do the task. That's your job. That's your role. But thinking about it in a certain way and then like doing it, those are two different things, right? Yeah. You kind of need both to be a good consultant.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's, even if you don't have a good mentor and someone explaining the why to you, I think something that you can do yourself. Try to see like, how do I fit into this overall team? What is the objective? And if no one's telling you, you can also just go ahead and ask, right? Like, I want to understand why we're having this meeting, what we're trying to achieve. Some of that big picture context can get 5 minutes, and like ask your project leadership to give you that context. Yeah,
and for that matter, like ask in that case, you don't have a senior associate or you don't have a good one. Ask your manager, like what have your fantastic associates done in the past?
Yeah,
right. Like what level of trust did you have and how did they get you that trust for your associates? Like, what are examples of bad associates? Right, like that's the kind of thing that if you don't have a copyable role model, at least you have like some data points to help you triangulate where you should be.
I think of it a little bit like sailing a boat. It's like confirmation, which direction are we going in, and like what is the destination we're trying to get to, and then okay, what is the role you want me to play on this boat? 2 and 3, like what is a great version of that role look like? And it's a little bit different, very different, I would say, than like give me 100 instructions of what to do to get to that destination, because the winds could change, the waves could change, like the whole team has to adjust in any given moment. You have to make your own decisions, but if we align on the overall direction, where I fit in, and generally some of like the behaviors you want to see, then we should get most of the way there, and the rest is fill in the blanks. You kind of adjust based on reality.
And you got to adjust on the fly, right? You're not going to get an instruction manual per wave change or wind change,
right?
And so you have to adjust that on the fly.
Because if it could be done with 100 very precise instructions, we would just ask the computer to do it.
Yeah, we would just AI it, right?
Right.
And we're trying to. I'm kidding.
More on that next episode.
So for me,
all those bots out there listening.
Don't worry about them. No, everyone's safe. All their jobs are safe.
For me, one of the biggest reasons why I left consulting so early was that I wasn't able to find good role models. I think oftentimes in big four firms, you do get lost in the shuffle, and admittedly that was my experience. And so, I was assigned a coach, I was assigned a staffer, but I didn't feel connected with any of those two people, whether by just conversation or kind of their interest in me. I just didn't feel that investment. And so I did get staffed on some really shitty projects, and as a result, I think I just, again, fell through the cracks in the consulting world, and that was a lot of the reasons why I left. However, when I went into the corporate space, I think one of the big kind of corrections I made was to find a team and role model or leader in my case that I looked up to and like wanted to invest in people. So somehow I was really lucky to get that, and the leader that I worked for believed in me, she believed in my potential, and she gave me a lot of step-up opportunities, whether it was just like, hey, here's a large data set, go and figure it out, or here, meet with all these clients, get their insights, give me some, actionable strategies, and again, just gave me a lot of latitude. So I think it's really important that you find leaders, role models that believe in your potential, and then also have some sort of clout in the organization. I would say like that clout being that she had also done really well for herself, and so as I started getting associated with her, that also gave me some credibility as I was new into the company. So I think that's where I was able to correct for some of the downfalls I had in consulting.
Yeah, that's one of the dangers, right? Because again, no one teaches you. Also, no one hands it to you. I think a lot of the firms have like coaching programs and relationship coach and career coach. they attempt to do that, but it doesn't always work out, right? Like I actually cycled through three formal coaches before I found one that actually wanted to accurately represent me, right? And so there are attempts to do this, but you the danger of this is if you don't try to fight for it and look for it, it may not happen. In which case, like that's a very difficult path for moving up in consulting.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about the upward downward spiral dynamic yet. It's probably worth talking about in consulting. It's like in consulting, especially more than my corporate role, everything is people based and many micro decisions. Mm-hmm. Right? You get switch projects, every month or every few months, and it's individual managers deciding which associates to staff, for example. And so this dynamic is, upward spiral would be you get staffed out of luck, first project out of undergrad, with a good team. The team, to Serena's point, pushes you, gives you real responsibility, you rise to the challenge, you do a good job, that manager says good things about you to other people, and all of a sudden, like, oh, this is a great associate.
Like a star associate,
Star
and
associate.
Everyone has to, get them on their projects.
It can do these complex analyses, and that person's always in demand. And all of a sudden, that person's getting staffed back to back to back, on more projects, generally with better teams, with more responsibility, and you're kind of just like learning and spiraling upwards, probably getting promoted more quickly.
Yeah.
Downward spiral is like bad luck. You get put on a bad project, no fault of your own. Things go poorly. People start saying, "Oh, this associate's not that great,"
Mm-hmm.
and spends long periods of time not getting put on good projects. When put on a project, you put with the B or the C team, who's giving you less responsibilities. You're learning at a slower clip, and so there's just this super quick divergence of upward spiral versus downward spiral, and 6 months in, those two people are on completely different career paths.
It swings really wide.
Yeah.
Right. That's a good point, and maybe that brings us to the biggest mistake for junior associates, the fifth biggest mistake, which I think is not pursuing opportunities to leave your swim lane and to find your opportunities, right? So I was fortunate enough when I joined is I had my interests and I contributed to the projects that I was on, but I also fought really hard to find my own opportunities, right? Like someone early on told me that in consulting, you can control your own destiny, right? You have to follow your swim lane. You have to do those swim lanes well. Otherwise, like you have to do the shit work until you get to do the next thing, right? You have to earn trust at the bottom before you get trust at the top.
Yeah.
But if you do that, you get to control your own destiny. So, and this, we worked together on it. We were interested in video games, right? So we looked for people that were trying to sell video game projects. I was interested in sort of like digital innovation. And so I aligned myself with people outside of my practice that were doing digital innovation, right? And so I kind of I looked for opportunities to leave my swim lane. At the time I was in like IT strategy, right? It was like very enterprise architecture, like boxes and lines, and I can't stand it. But
You're a robot.
Yeah, it was like boxes and lines and like really technical stuff, and I'm not on the technical side. So I aligned myself with like the right people, and you get to do that if you kind of like accomplish your base level responsibilities, and then you can kind of control. You can ride that boat where you want it to. Especially if you satisfy the rings under where you are.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did you? I know you also had that you were looking at topics that you were interested in. You kind of like pivoted yourself around. Is that advice that you generally give junior people as well?
I'll think about it. Come back to me.
Yeah, so for me, I probably did what, John, you did too late. I started off in the forensic accounting practice because I had an undergraduate degree in accounting, but yet I didn't want to go to audit. So this was like my next best path.
Yeah.
And so basically had, 2-3 projects in forensic accounting. And by that time, a year and a half in, it was a little too late for me to try to switch into another practice. I think I had I had more interest truly in like consumer and digital experiences, customer journey work, but by that time, a year and a half, people were like, well, you're only really good for risk management, compliance type of roles. And I was like, no, thank you. That is even worse than what I'm doing now. And so, yeah, I think I just made the decision to switch internally a little too late. And so at that point, my only option was really to leave the firm. And that's what I did. And I'm very happy I did it. I think I just wish, like, in the conversations with my coaches within the practice at that time, they at least could give me some of the pathways and guidance to talk to other teams more effectively and build those relationships. So yeah, that was my mistake.
So that let's talk about, like, how do you actually do that, right? How do you pursue those opportunities? And I can, I have an example, but of how you should do it. But how have you guys done that?
So in my corporate life, our company was just very mobility centric, and so very encouraging of having coffee chats, which I think you can actually embrace the coffee chat culture in any type of environment, whether startup or corporate. And so what that means is tactically, like, setting up 30 minutes with different folks across the company in various functions and practices or projects that you've heard of, and like you might just have interest in learning more about. So I think for me in consulting, the firm was just so big and scary and I had nowhere to start. I just felt super lost. Whereas in my corporate environment, my leader was really strong, whereas I told her about my interest area, she was like, oh, let me connect you to XYZ. And then from there, it kind of just snowballed to me meeting more and more people across the company, and then really figuring out, hey, if they have a job opening on their team, like, how do I apply for that job? Whether formally by application or kind of just like sliding in on some special projects.
I don't know if you've seen that meme, but like to that point, I don't know if you've seen the meme about consulting, but it's like you apply for a bunch of jobs, you go through a bunch of interviews, and then finally, I'm a consultant now.
Yeah.
Now as a consultant, you now apply for a bunch of projects, interview for a
Yeah,
bunch of
it's
projects.
a non-stop.
You got to do it again.
Yeah.
You got to do it again at consulting. But really, like, but that's actually for your own benefit,
Right.
Because at that point, you're already in the firm. What I did early on was I looked for people that were selling to video game clients, and I reached out to a bunch of MDs and partners and said, hey, I'm really interested in this space. Here's what I'm working on right now. You got to have some kind of marketability, right? So here's where I am. Here's what I can do.
So you're coffee chatting.
I was coffee chatting. I was also, and so were you. I was volunteering my time outside of Project Works to say, like, if you want a deck fixed up, like, I'll fix up a deck for you. I'll clean up some notes for you, right? I'll put together a pitch for you, right? And because for me it was a win-win, because that content is really interesting to me, right? And, but at the same time, is if you can deliver good quality on that stuff that you're essentially volunteering for, they'll think of you next time they sell to that client, and then you basically kind of like you're slowly shifting your realm of work, right? So I did that for a partner, and then actually it was funny. I joined a call that a partner was on that sold to video game companies, and I misspoke at that call, so he yelled at me on that call with a bunch of VPs. But then 2 months later, he was like, "Hey, you're the guy that was interested in video games, right? Do you want to join my project at this big publisher?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely, I do." And so, like, yeah, you have to kind of like find your own opportunity. I would say how you get that done is reach out to people doing interesting things that you're interested in and volunteer your work. Market yourself and volunteer your time to help them with, even if it's grunt work, even if it's note cleanup, volunteer your time and get your face in front of them.
Just don't over volunteer.
Just don't over volunteer. Yeah, at some point you gotta know when to cut your losses if, for example, the partner can't sell or the director can't sell.
Well, because I think it's, if you have a lot of capacity, great, you volunteer whatever you can. If you get opportunities, you want to make sure that you deliver on those opportunities, right? Because if you mess it up, then the door's going to close, you're not going to come back. And so you have to make sure that whatever opportunities you do grab onto, you execute. And that could be, you're fully available, you volunteer for 5 things, or it could be, hey, I'm already on a project, but I'm working on a transition into a different direction. So I want to pick up one side project.
Yeah.
Right? I want to make sure that one side project goes well, not, that one side project goes well and my current project falls apart.
Yeah.
Or I pick up 3 side projects and some of them go badly, right? Because then the moment, to the previous point about like brand, the moment your brand becomes questionable,
Yeah.
it becomes much harder to get the next opportunity, right?
Yeah.
So you have to make sure that like, if you're doing a project that has to go well in addition to one side project, or like if I'm doing a few side projects because I'm on the bench, great, but I gotta make sure that my 2 or 3 things go well. I'm not volunteering for 6 things.
Yeah.
So tactically, I have a question. Like
Yeah.
you're tied to a particular practice,
Yeah.
but you want to do work for a different practice.
Yeah.
How do you think about billable hours and charging those codes? Because that's another implication that happens when you overstretch to other practice lines.
The example that I've heard is you should always be looking for your next job, and the amount of time you spend on it in a given week should fluctuate between 0 and like 20%, give or take, right? And so it's implied that the other 80% of your time you're busy with your normal responsibility you're being paid for. You gotta make sure that goes well, period.
Yeah.
And if you're happy, your external or your secondary search could be 0% of your time, great. Or sometimes you're like, I'm unhappy, I want to grow, I want to try new things, and it could be as high as 20, maybe even 30%, right? But it is a side project that you're doing, you're managing on the side to make sure.
Whatever that percentage is, you still have to do your job, right?
Yes.
Like there's like bar none, there's no excuse for anything that you put your time into has to be done well. And if at any point you're sacrificing quality for like being spread too thin, you gotta cut some stuff, right? Like the advantage to being in consulting is that you can have control of your own destiny, but that should not that opportunity shouldn't be taken advantage of to think of like to say that you can slack on other stuff in order to control your own destiny, right? You still have to do the job. You still have to be really good at that job, and then as a benefit, you can control your own destiny in many different ways that you can't do in other industries.
Yeah. As we're talking, interestingly enough, brings what we said here to another mistake that we talked about earlier, which was attitude. I think 2 characteristics actually was brought out through our examples. The first was curiosity. So like having curiosity of like what your interests may be and like what else is happening in like the world in which you're working in. And then the second is like being entrepreneurial. You can be curious, but like if you don't actually like take action or try to actually make something happen of your curiosity, then you're kind of just stuck in the situation or where you are presently. So being entrepreneurial to find your own next opportunity is really important to be successful.
So look, I think being a new junior associate is hard, especially in consulting, right? There's a lot of opportunity afforded to you, and you can take advantage of a lot of it. But the downside is that no one actually teaches you how to do that well, and so there's a lot of mistakes that you can make. And to a lot of your examples before is like a lot of it can be luck, but I think the good news is that you can control that luck and you can control a lot of that path. And so these are some biggest mistakes that you could make and how to address them. Any final words on some of the things that we talked about?
Sponsored by Celsius.
You stop that.
Just seize the day. Make it yours.
Carpe diem.
Carpe diem. Great. So if you like these, I think we gave 5 biggest mistakes. There's a lot out there, and so if you like these, if you have a question about a particular situation, let us know. But if you like more, we can put together more, and we'll catch you for the next one. Thanks everybody for tuning in.